Now, just so you know, she shortened that because of my request. She did not object.
Half hour later.
A place to belong, that's what we're talking about here. Still. Seems like maybe we're doing that for a really long time, but, this place to belong is, and we've talked about it, it's a place of grace. Say that with me, place of grace. Place of grace. And in that grace, this place becomes a place to worship. Say, to worship. To worship. Then we talked about how this was a place of community. Say, of community.
Of community.
And that enables it to be a place to learn. Say, to learn. And last week we talked about how a place to belong is a place of generosity. And that, so repeat after me, a place of generosity. You know, it's really bad when the crowd knows the line better than the preacher. And that's all right, because this being a place of generosity brings us to the next piece of the puzzle. For when we become a place of generosity, we become a place to serve. Turn to a neighbor and say, to serve. Now you all didn't do that very good. Turn to a neighbor and say, to serve. There are people online that said it louder than you. Isn't that right, online folks? So, I've tried to think about how to talk about the church being a place to serve, because I know what you're thinking. Oh, he wants us to do something. Again. Some more. Tomorrow. Today. Next week. And the answer to that is yes. But there's some caveats. Do you know that within the American church, we do more busy work than any other church in the world? How many of you think sometimes we do busy work as the church?
Yes.
Yes. That was a resounding yes from the front row. Nobody else even moved. Did you move back there? Oh, you raised your hand, just not very high. We have to do this around here, so I know it. This idea of a place of generosity becoming a place to serve is really important for us, because here's one of the things that I can tell you is that churches are busy doing stuff that doesn't make any difference in the world around them. Now, that seems like a loud condemnation of the church. And it's not really condemnation of the church. It's just that the church got so busy doing what it was doing that it forgot why it was doing it. And then the need for doing it stopped. And we kept going. I know that's true because I know the story of the club that started on the ocean. Do you know there are clubs on the ocean? One day, there was a group of 3 people on the top of the beach, and they were watching this guy in the water. And he got in trouble, and he found out that it was not a good place to get caught in the water. And so they watched him, and they couldn't do anything about it because they weren't ready. And the man died. So the 3 got together and said, well, we need to do something so that when something happens like that, we can respond in an emergency. And so they created the first ever life-saving club. Yeah, the Coast Guard. And sure enough, that group had a purpose. And they bought a rowboat and all of the life-saving things. And they set up schedules so that there were people... there were lifeguards on the beach when people were going to be in the water. And sure enough, people still went out in the water, got in trouble, cried for help. But now there was a group that was going out there. Well, the club grew. It was kind of the in thing. Let's join the life-saving club. Save people's lives. And so then they had to build a clubhouse. And pretty soon, they had more members than they could ever use. And so people started having other jobs, like there was a social chair. You know what their job was? To have fun. And there was a fundraising chair, because when you have that many people, you have to have that many boats, and you have to have that many life rings. And pretty soon they had, fundraisers. They had hog roasts and bazaars and all kinds of things, and they were raising money. And they had money in the bank. Because, after all, how many boats do you really need? Pretty soon, they were meeting and talking, and they were talking about how great they were. The Chamber of Commerce in their town gave them an award and said, "What a great thing you are." And that group continued to grow, and it grew because people wanted to be part of that. And then, as sometimes happens, they started to ask questions. Now, why are we meeting? Why are we here? And somebody says, I remember years ago we used to go out on the beach and save people. And they pulled out the history books and there were stories about that. And they said, why don't we do that anymore? And so they said, well, I don't know. People should know better. If they were really going to be out in the ocean, they'd have what they needed. And pretty soon, the Life-Saving Club lost its purpose. And eventually, it grew old and gray and died. Well, does that sound like anything you know? Do you think that could be the church at some point? Well, you see, Paul understood that when he was writing 1 Corinthians chapter 7. He says, now look, you have a purpose. So everybody raise your hand, right hand, and repeat after me. I have a purpose. Okay, now here's the truth. It's not from the preacher. It's not from the chairman of the board. It's not from the chair of the elders. He's back there. It's not from the praise team. It's from God. It's from God. And because of that, that purpose is your purpose. And that's how it works with believers. Do you know when you became a believer, God said, I have something for her to do. I have something for him to do. And it's going to change the world. Think about that for a minute. How many of you would like to change your world? How many of you would like to bring just one person to Jesus? How many of you would like to bring 20 people to Jesus? How many of us would like to make a difference in such a way that our lives are changed? You see, I wonder sometimes about bringing people to Jesus. I've heard a lot about it, right? It's the preacher's job. Trust me, I've heard that. It's the preacher's job. And it is the preacher's job. But it's really the preacher's job to equip his people to do it. Because how many people can I talk to even in a good day? But how many people can we talk to in an easy day? So, we need to think about this idea of our generous place being a place to serve. Now, in verse 17 that was read, and really it's the most important verse in all that was read, it talks about how we have been called. Now, just so you get a better idea, and this may be more for the men in the room and online than the women, but I suspect the women will get it. Every year, the National Football League does a draft. Now, how many of you have heard of that? It's a draft. And on that day, Cleveland goes out and drafts somebody that is never going to make it to the NFL. That's just the truth. But they don't do that very well. But other teams, like the Dallas Cowboys, go out and draft somebody like Dak Prescott, who, when there's an emergency, steps up and becomes one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And they drafted him in the 4th round, not in the 1st round. Now, in the NFL draft, the teams go out and find a player that supposedly is going to become a star. Somebody who's really good, just needs some coaching. So if you need a quarterback, you'd go out and draft a quarterback. If you need a linebacker, you would draft and that's always true except for Cleveland. God bless them. I have friends in Cleveland. We often talk about their drafting capabilities. Well, think about it for a minute. Their basketball team drafted LeBron. They knew what to do. Their football team drafted somebody named Kaiser. I think you get it. I don't want to make too much fun of Cleveland, but it's pretty easy and it's pretty fun for us to think about. Okay, so in the church, God calls us. Now, he doesn't do it necessarily according to need. He doesn't look down at First Christian Church and say, hey, gosh, First Christian Church needs somebody who can do dishes, so I'm going to send so-and-so. Although we wouldn't object to dish doers, right? Maybe. Or maybe we need people to talk about Jesus to people. Or maybe we need Sunday school teachers. Or maybe we need musicians. Or maybe we need elders and deacons and, You see, so God calls people. And here's the reality. God has called all of us to this place. Do you know how I know that? Does anybody know how I know God's called us all here? We're here. It's amazing how that works. And when you tell God no, bad things happen. So, if you're smart, you never say no to God. Otherwise, you end up like Moses. Do you remember Moses, the burning bush? God's calling. Moses, I want you to go back to Egypt. And Moses says, are you kidding?
Seriously?
There are people there who want to kill me. No, Moses, I'll take care of you. You just go and say what I tell you to say, and everything's going to be just fine. Well, you know that, right? You know that part. And, Moses says, well, God, I don't talk very well in public. I stutter a bit and stammer, and I get real nervous, and I start to have the shakes. And, wouldn't you rather send someone else? No, Moses, you're the one. Because you know all the right people. You see, God put Moses out in the wilderness so he could get ready, prepared. And finally, Moses went. And we know the rest of that story, right? He went, he told Pharaoh, God's coming you need to let his people go. And Pharaoh said no. And nobody ever killed him. I was always amazed at that story. You read that story, the Pharaoh doesn't just kill him. What's wrong with that Pharaoh?
Chicken.
Certainly not an American movie, is it? But it isn't just Moses. Think about that poor fellow, Jonah. You know about Jonah, right?
Yeah.
Jonah's a cool dude. And God comes through and says, hey, Jonah, you have all the gifts and talents. I'm going to send you to Nineveh. And Jonah looks at him and says, I can't even say Nineveh. I don't know where it is. Oh, I'll show you. God says, you're going to go and you're going to preach and they're going to be converted. And Jonah says, first of all, I don't believe you. Because those Ninevites, they're just evil. They're an evil people in an evil land doing evil things to evil people. Why do you want me to go there? I'm not going there. Now, this is where it's really important to pay attention to what can happen. Jonah says to God, I'm not going and you can't make me. Make no bones about it. That is what Jonah said. Now, trust me, in the English version that we get translated, it's much nicer and prettier and nicer and prettier. That's not what happened. Jonah said, no way, Jose. Ain't going. You can't make me. See you later. I'm leaving town. He gets on a boat going south. Nineveh is north. A storm comes up. It's the worst storm in ages, and the people are going, what in the world's happening here? And Jonah finally owns up and says, it's my fault. Throw me overboard. God will save you. You know, those people weren't stupid. They picked Jonah up and threw him over.
Okay, bye.
And the storm stopped, and Jonah sank. I always thought that was interesting. The storm stops, and Jonah sinks. Right into the open mouth of the whale. Now, I know all of the reasons that this story seems really strange and amazing. And then, of course, there's the whale. You know what the whale does? He goes north for 3 days. And then I think Jonah, in the belly of the whale, is tired of the stench. So he's down there trying to figure out what to do. I think he actually figures out a way to light a fire in the belly of the whale. Gives the whale heartburn. And the whale comes up to the surface. And it says, it's not what it says. The whale threw up all over the beach. That's what it says. And I shouldn't say it. In the mess is Jonah. And he goes back into the water and rinses off and looks at where he is. And guess what the sign on the beach says? Nineveh. Welcome to Nineveh. So he goes over and he starts to preach. And people are converted. And he preaches some more. And people are converted. He preaches all the way across Nineveh, and people are saved every day. They're converted. They're turned to God. And he gets all the way to the other side, looks at what he's done, and he says, crap. It worked. I told God that there was no chance in that place it would ever work. And God says, told you so. I think that's one of God's favorite phrases, by the way. Told you so, because how often in our lives, in our day, in our time, have we said to God, ain't gonna work, not gonna happen, and God says, na-na-na-na-boo-boo. Oh, by the way, that's very scriptural. Jesus said it once. Na-na-na-na-boo-boo. And he sang it too. How many other stories do we know? You see, we're called to service, and that's the reminder that God didn't just save us. How many of you think that that's enough, that God just saved us? I could live there, that'd be easy, but it wouldn't be true. Everywhere in Scripture that he talks about salvation, there are two sides to the coin. There is the side that says, you are saved. Now go do. You are saved. Now go do. You are saved. Now go do. In other words, we've coined a phrase for it. We are saved to serve. It goes back much older than me. Some of you have probably heard that phrase before. We are saved to serve. We are not saved to sit. And that's important. Because you see, we have a purpose. We've talked about the purpose of the church and the purpose of believers since day 1 of January last year. Well, it would have been day 8 or 9 because of the snowstorm. But from the beginning of our time together, we have talked about what the church is called to do. We are called to love God and to love one another. And we are called to go make disciples, baptize, and teach. And if we're doing stuff that doesn't do those 5 things, then we're doing busy work. And we're asking hard questions. How does this fit that category? Now, I'm going to give you 2 things to remember, and then we're going to be done. There are 2 kinds of service in the church. And this is going to be important for the days ahead. There's mission and there's ministry. Say mission and ministry.
Mission and ministry.
And you're called to both. Each of us. Now, some of us are called more to ministry. Ministry is the stuff that goes on inside the church so the church can do stuff outside the church. Does that make sense? We have elders and deacons and Sunday school teachers and sometimes it's the preacher and we have fellowship committees and fellowship groups and those people are all there in order to equip those on the mission side, which is also all of us. See, we all have stuff on the ministry side, but we also all have stuff on the mission side. But it's different for each person. There are people like me who love to talk to people about Jesus. Quite frankly, just love to talk to people. There are people who can care about people and who can make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches or peanut butter and jelly baggies, as the case may be. There are people who can put together a Thanksgiving basket in no time at all, and it would drive me crazy. Mission is what we do outside the church. Ministry is inside, and we got to have both. And it takes people with gifts and skills, and God has looked down and said, you and you and you and you and you and you have these gifts, and you have this gift and this gift and this gift and this gift, and you're supposed to work together so that those gifts bless the most people. And so we come together to serve. That first verse says, God has called you all to a life of service. But it's different for each one. And that's the good news, because if you all were all like me, we'd be tired. And we wouldn't have any Sunday school teachers. We wouldn't have any people to care for people. And if we were all caregivers, well, we'd be really well taken care of, but we wouldn't be growing. And so in the church, when we think about it, the church is a place to serve. Because it's a place to belong. Amen. Now, This is one of those times that I'm going to do something I don't normally do. There it is. And this is actually going to be the end of worship today. But I want you to sit there, maybe close your eyes, and listen to this prayer that was written. Make me a servant, humble and meek. Lord, let me lift up those who are weak, and may the prayer of my heart always be, make me a servant, make me a servant, make me a servant today. Oh God, as we leave this place this day, may we all go praying that you would make us a servant. And all of God's people said, Amen.